This story follows the life of a high school student named Haruki, who is constantly bullied by some of his classmates. His dark and tormented life suddenly changes drastically when a beautiful new student who has just transferred to their school approaches him and offers him something unexpected. A transfer student has just arrived at his new school. He seems enthusiastic and excited about his new school, which isn't as large as the one in Tokyo. He's walking through the hallways trying to find his new classroom. However, as he passes the biology room, he seems to spot something interesting. In the biology classroom, a soaked student named Haruki is seen being bullied by 3 other students. A girl named Riona sits on top of Haruki to restrain him. At the same time, a student named Takagi is recording the situation with his cell phone. Another student named Orihara is holding a book titled All the Torture in the World, while also holding a bottle of water. Orihara guides his 2 friends to torture Haruki this time by simultaneously pouring water into Haruki's mouth and nose. Of course, this action makes the victim start to feel short of breath. The feeling of being threatened also makes Haruki fear death. These bullies knew that their actions hurt Haruki, but what they expected from the young man was that he would try harder so he could entertain them in his boredom at school. Haruki, who was short of breath, tried to breathe, but the water that began to enter his lungs made him cough and vomit the water that was forcibly infused earlier, which hit Riona, who was still on top of Haruki. Riona felt disgusted, but on the other hand, she also wanted to do something crazy. Riona wanted to know if they could still do it without having to pin down Haruki. Takagi wasn't sure because Haruki refused. Because of this, Takagi raised his fist and hit Haruki. The blow made Haruki bleed from his nose. The 3 bullies looked happy when they saw Haruki's nose bleed. They immediately immortalized Haruki's pitiful look. Just as they were about to repeat their actions, the transfer student who came saw and caught them red-handed. The young man offered himself to be strangled. Riona and her 2 friends didn't understand what the boy meant at all, but instead of an explanation, all they got from him was the name of a fool. The bullies were furious. Takagi immediately wanted to beat up the transfer student, but Riona stopped him, saying they shouldn't just hit their juniors. With good intentions, Riona stroked the transfer student's head and advised him to return to his class. However, the young man, unexpectedly, displayed an irritated expression and told the girl not to touch him. The transfer student didn't hold back and even insulted the 3 bullies implicitly by saying that there was something strange with 6 legs or more, and had 2 tongues, and that made him hate lowly people so much. Riona didn't understand the meaning of the words, while Takagi thought the transfer student was a stupid figure, because surely everyone would also hate the figure that the transfer student had just described. The transfer student suddenly took out a handkerchief and dipped it in the aquarium so that the handkerchief became completely wet. The bullies were surprised and did not know what the transfer student was doing. Takagi then did not stay silent and tried to pull the young man's hand. The transfer student was silent, but a moment later, he caught Takagi and covered his mouth with the wet handkerchief while saying that what he did to Orihara was an example of the right way to torture. Slowly, Takagi began to feel short of breath, and at the same time, Riona tried to warn the transfer student to let go of Orihara. Just as they were about to start causing a commotion, from outside the biology room, a silhouette of a teacher was seen pacing the hallway while saying a name as if he was looking for someone. Seeing the situation was dire, the bullies tried to escape from the situation so as not to be caught by the teacher outside the biology room. However, before they left the room, they gave a warning to the transfer student that if they ever met, they would not hesitate to send him to God, the young man. The biology room was silent, only Haruki and the beauty student were left. Haruki thanked the young man because he thought he had helped Haruki get out of his bad situation. Haruki was cleaning up the mess in the room while the transfer student asked him why he shouldn't try to fight back, because there were actually so many ways to escape the bullying situation. Haruki just stayed silent. Seeing that his question seemed like it wouldn't get an answer, the transfer student chose to leave Haruki in the room alone. But before actually leaving the room, Haruki said that even with fish, the situation will still be the same. Those who are the weakest will have a habit of attacking with small objects. The 3 people refused to stop Bull. Ying, even if Haruki tried to stop them, the consequence that would arise was that someone else would become the target of the 3 people's bullying. If that were the case, the bullying would never end. A person can never be at peace if they feel intimidated. These thoughts led Haruki to resign himself to being a victim of bullying. The transfer student was stunned by Haruki's explanation. A smile appeared on the handsome young man's lips. Haruki then returned to his class, and with his appearance still messy, there were many of his classmates wondered what had just happened to Haruki. Haruki's face looked messy while his clothes were still soaked. Haruki refused to explain the bullying situation he had just experienced in the biology room, and only gave a short answer that he was fine to those who had asked. The 3 bullies who had bullied Haruki in the biology room were Haruki's classmates. They also responded to Haruki's messy appearance, but still said that he was fine. Not to forget, the verbal taunts were also thrown as jokes that were not funny at all. Class was about to start, and a teacher had entered their classroom. Unusually, there was a new figure brought in by the teacher. The figure was a beautiful transfer student, but a man named Yukihime Takashi. He was a transfer student from Tokyo and also an eyewitness to the bullying case that befell Haruki in the biology room some time ago. His classmates were immediately captivated by Yuki's appearance, which looked beautiful yet handsome. Both male and female students in the class were already captivated by Yuki's appearance, especially her face. At the same time, Haruki's eyes widened in shock because he recognized the figure as the person who intervened in the bullying case and acted as his savior. Not only Haruki, but the 3 bullies also noticed and recognized Yuki. While they seemed a little surprised, they also seemed quite happy to have a new target. Like most transfer student introductions, the homeroom teacher who brought Yuki into the classroom asked the students to be friendly and befriend him. That day, there was a physical education class taught by a teacher named Onizuka. The students in the class seemed quite alert as they were about to attend Onizuka-sensei's lesson. It seemed Onizuka-sensei was a strict teacher with his teaching schedule, so all the students hurried to change into their gym uniforms so they wouldn't be late for Onizuka-sensei's class, as the consequences would be quite severe. At that time, Yuki had finished changing his clothes and was ready to go to the field, but his steps were blocked by Takagi and Orihara. The 2 bullies wanted to take out their anger on Yuki, who had disturbed them while bullying Haruki. Haruki came to mediate so that Yuki would not become the next victim, but instead, he received a direct punch from Takagi. The students who witnessed the bullying tried to ignore it and were reluctant to get involved. They were even immediately expelled by Takagi, so they would not interfere with his business. Orihara now grabbed Yuki's hair and pointed a cutter at the young man's neck. He intimidated and threatened Yuki that his actions this morning were quite annoying for them, and if Yuki continued to act like that in the future, they would not stay silent and give Yuki a very bad school life. They showed no mercy at all. When they had finished delivering their message, Takagi and Orihara then left, leaving Yuki and Haruki in the locker room. Yuki then tried to check the door, and sure enough, the 2 of them were trapped inside the locker room. Seeing that they couldn't get out immediately for gym class made Haruki quite scared. If they were late for gym class, the disciplinary action they would receive was hopping like rabbits 10 times around the schoolyard. On the field, Onizuka-sensei had already begun taking attendance of his students. The 3 bullies who were also attending the class seemed very happy to know that Yuki would later carry out the punishment with a body that looked frail. They couldn't wait to see Yuki's desperate look. From inside the locker room, Haruki began to panic because he saw Onizuka-sensei starting to take attendance. Haruki then tried many ways to get out of the room, and now he was going to call the school staff room so they could get out. Just as Haruki picked up his phone, in front of him was Yuki, lifting the lockers in the students' locker room. Of course, Haruki was very surprised by what Yuki would do. Outside on the field, Onizuka-sensei had arrived at Yuki's name, but did not find the student who owned the name. Onizuka-sensei also realized that Haruki was not there. Riona and her group giggled happily when they thought their plan was going smoothly. Suddenly, a locker from the locker room broke through the locker room glass and fell right near Onizuka-sensei and his stew. Dents gathered. Everyone who saw this was certainly shocked, but in this case the perpetrator acted normally. The one who had thrown the locker was Yuki. Haruki was shocked, but he seemed to know what Yuki would do next, but the young man was immediately afraid because at that time they were on the 2nd floor of the school building. Yuki was not afraid or hesitant at all. She was determined to stay down and attend the gym class guided by Onizuka-sensei. Because of the impact, Haruki would not move from his place. Shiryuki then acted and started to lift Haruki, carrying him like a princess, then jumped from the edge of the locker room window down directly to the field. Haruki panicked while Shiryuki managed to land calmly, of course, with Haruki in her arms. Onizuka-sensei looked surprised by the way his two students appeared, while Riona and her friends looked annoyed. Shiryuki immediately confirmed her presence to Onizuka-sensei, followed by Haruki. What Shiryuki did certainly caused a commotion among his friends. Many were amazed, many were shocked. Shiryuki was a transfer student with a handsome face but a posture that looked frail posture. The weak-looking young man had just thrown a clothes locker out of the locker room on the second floor. Not enough, Shiryuki also jumped from the locker room to the field while carrying Haruki. His strength seemed inversely proportional to his physical appearance. How the other students saw Shiryuki made the three bullies who were also there feel reluctant. The three then decided to leave Onizuka-sensei's class, despite Onizuka-sensei's own attempts to prevent it. Shiryuki and Haruki ended up getting punished by walking around the field with a bunny walk. Haruki ended up angry with Shiryuki, while Shiryuki tried to get closer to Haruki. Shiryuki only wanted to help Haruki, but Haruki didn't expect that help at all. Shiryuki's help for Haruki was something that bothered him. He wanted Shiryuki to act politely towards him. Haruki left, leaving Shiryuki still confused and silent. Afterward, Haruki experienced further bullying by Orihara and his gang. The bullies vented their frustration on Shiryuki by abusing Haruki. One of the bullies even intended to carve the words, "I'm a slave," onto Haruki's face with a box cutter. Their actions were accidentally witnessed by several kids from the baseball extracurricular. However, they were reluctant to get involved with the bullying gang, which was already quite well known at school. It wasn't just those two. Shiryuki was also up in the tree watching them from the start. He saw how the two baseball players seemed reluctant to get involved. The bully gang's track record was disturbing. The victims were shown no mercy, even when they cried, and their hurt wasn't even heard. They continued to torture them under the pretext of punishment until they grew tired of it. Furthermore, several videos of the bullying were even circulated on social media. This meant that none of the bullies were hiding their actions. The abuse perpetrated by Orihara and his gang indirectly claimed lives. The victims suffered chronic psychological problems, leading them to return to God's lap. Many of their victims lacked mental fortitude. That's why they were quite happy with Haruki. Haruki persevered well despite their constant abuse. The outrageous act left no one brave enough to help the victim. Two members of the baseball club chose to leave and not retrieve their equipment, even though it would have meant canceling practice. Shiryuki seemed quite disappointed that no one dared to stand up to the intimidation. The next day at school, the three bullies waited boredly for Haruki's arrival, but it seemed that Haruki was late that day. Since his usual target hadn't arrived yet, they randomly chose another bully target in the classroom. None of them dared to fight back or defend the victim. Even Riona, a girl, didn't dare to fight back. They started thinking about taking their new target to the backyard so they could have more freedom to abuse him. That day's victims struggled against the bullies for forgiveness, but instead of being released, they got worse. Haruki had just arrived at the front door when he saw that the bullying that usually happened to him was now happening to someone else. Haruki remembered his old memory of a similar incident. In the past, Haruki witnessed with his own eyes a classmate being bullied severely. The target at that time whimpered for help, afraid that the bullies would finish him off. Haruki returned at this time. He couldn't bear it, then stopped the bullying and turned it on himself. The bullies seemed happy to see their favorite target had arrived. Haruki was immediately taken to the back to relieve the boredom of the three troublemakers. Shiryuki watched silently. In his mind, he asked why Haruki had to go alone. Shiryuki became curious to know Haruki more deeply. Therefore, Ryuki continued to follow Haruki wherever he went and was taken by the bullies. He knew everything that happened to Haruki. Until one day, Haruki was in the biology room. Haruki was quite calm while feeding the fish in the aquarium in the room. However, his composure was shattered when three of his bullies approached him. The three naughty students thought Haruki was trying to avoid them, but in reality, he wasn't. Riona then became interested in the aquarium's contents. Haruki tried to protect the fish, but Riona became irritated by his behavior. The bullies already knew that the fish in the aquarium were very important to Haruki. Haruki seemed to take very good care of them, and knowing this, they would surely steal the fish from him. This time Haruki spoke up. He begged the man to stop his work, but of course his pleas were meaningless. The bullying resumed. This time Haruki was forced to become a living aquarium for the fish. The decision to keep the fish alive or dead was Haruki's. When Takagi made Haruki into a living aquarium, the other two colleagues laughed and praised his actions, which they considered remarkable. It was only one fish, but Haruki's mouth was already full. There were still two more that Orihara would cram into Haruki soon. Haruki could no longer hold on and ended up vomiting the contents of his mouth. The fish then fell to the floor and was accidentally stepped on by Riona. Riona, disgusted because her shoes were dirty, then wiped her shoes on Haruki's head. Haruki looked terrible, not to mention the aquarium with the remaining fish was also deliberately dropped. Haruki rushed to grab the two fallen fish, hoping they could still be saved. The three bullies seemed happy to see Haruki starting to despair. Once satisfied, they left Haruki and went as they pleased. All of this was witnessed by Shiryuki from behind the window outside. Haruki couldn't save the remaining live fish. He ended up burying them under a tree. Shiryuki was there, asking Haruki if the young man would continue to let the situation continue like this. Haruki remained silent. His sorrow was greater. He still wouldn't change the situation and was willing to be a target as long as no one was killed. Haruki would rather be abused than watch others be beaten and hurt to the bone. It would be better for Haruki if he didn't drag others into his hell. Haruki's desperate words made Shiryuki even more interested in the young man. Shiryuki wanted to know the feelings he was feeling right now when he saw Haruki. His heart was beating so fast. Shiryuki was increasingly immersed in his curiosity about Haruki. He groped for what feelings he actually had for Haruki, until he finally concluded that his feelings might be love. Shiryuki confessed to Haruki that he had fallen in love with the desperate young man. Haruki was increasingly confused by the situation. Just a moment ago, he explained that he didn't want Shiryuki to stop him from making a sacrifice so that no one else would be victimized, but now he suddenly received a confession. Shiryuki wanted Haruki. Haruki was still confused by everything. Finally, Shiryuki asked what if there were no bullies? What if she eliminated their existence? Haruki became interested. He wanted to know if Shiryuki could eliminate them, and Shiryuki confidently agreed that she could. Shiryuki even promised Haruki. Meanwhile, the central bullies gathered. They were in dire straits because they didn't have enough money. Initially, their solution was to ask Haruki to bring them money, but then Riona had the idea to sell Haruki to a perverted old man. They agreed. Riona even planned to find 3 or 4 old male customers at once. Unbeknownst to anyone, Shiryuki was there observing their plans. The next day at school, Takagi, Riona, and Orihara were waiting for Haruki's arrival, but even at lunchtime, Haruki still hadn't arrived. Riona thought that maybe what they did to Haruki yesterday was too much, making the young man commit to return to God. They didn't seem to care because in their minds, the actions they did, such as bullying and abusing others, were very enjoyable, like what they had just done to Haruki yesterday in the biology room. Takagi was even more delighted when he saw Haruki's desperate look. He imagined Haruki begging him to stop. The situation even made him very excited. Takagi wanted to realize their plan to sell Haruki, so that afternoon, he opened a dating app for male lovers to see if any perverts were willing to buy Haruki. Takagi wanted to see Haruki's desperate face screaming from being worked on by his buyer. Not only that, Takagi even wanted to show the site to everyone. Not just Takagi, but also Orihara and Riona. The 3 high school students truly had evil intentions to sell Haruki and enjoy the proceeds. They even placed a vase of flowers on Haruki's table as a symbol of his death. One of the girls was disturbed by the commotion caused by the 3 men. But before she could realize her mistake, Takagi suddenly grabbed her assets and sexually assaulted her. Shiryuki entered the classroom and saw a vase of flowers on Haruki's desk. Takagi then greeted Shiryuki, who had just arrived, while saying that Haruki was dead. Orihara added that the reason why Haruki died was that Shiryuki interfered in their affairs. Haruki was said to have committed return to God because they bullied him too often until Haruki could no longer stand all the mental pressure he received. Shiryuki then calmly asked the 3 people why they bullied Haruki. Takagi then gave a short answer regarding the reason they bullied him was simply because they were bored. Takagi, Orihara and Riona then rushed out of the classroom. But before that, Takagi advised that because Haruki was no longer there, the next target of bullying was Shiryuki. Shiryuki took back a vase of flowers that had been on Haruki's table. He intended to give it to Haruki. Shiryuki looked around for Haruki, and when he arrived in front of the biology room, Shiryuki saw that the figure she was teaching was in the room. Shiryuki was about to go in to approach Haruki, but his intention was cancelled when he saw Haruki's shoulders shaking. From behind, Haruki was seen holding his temple, which was the place where Riona's shoe had landed earlier. The incident seemed to have left a mark and become a trauma for Haruki. Shiryuki decided to go in and ask Haruki if that day he would decide to start skipping school, but what Haruki wanted to do was not like that. He didn't want to waste his precious time skipping school, but Haruki didn't want to enter the same class as Takagi, Orihara, and Riona. Shiryuki then asked Haruki if the young man still remembered the promise Shiryuki had made to Haruki. Haruki looked confused and reluctant to answer, but Shiryuki reminded him again, emphasizing that they had promised that once Shiryuki managed to eliminate Takagi, Orihara, and Riona, they would officially date. After saying this, Shiryuki then told Haruki that he would wait for him in class. Shiryuki brought the flowers that had been in the vase. He placed them on the grave of Haruki's discus fish. Standing in front of the fish's grave, Shiryuki reaffirmed her commitment to Haruki. Elsewhere, Takagi, Orihara, and Riona were gathering for a smoke. Takagi's search led them to find customers willing to buy Haruki. One was a perverted old man who offered 100,000 yen for Haruki. They had found a customer, but what they hadn't seen that day was the creature they were selling Haruki. They were still trying to negotiate a time with the customer. Once they agreed, the three immediately divided up their tasks. The next day, Takagi and Orihara were quite happy to see Haruki already in class since morning. They planned to bring Haruki to their customer that day, but Orihara reminded Takagi that what they were going to do should not be found out by Shiryuki. After school, Haruki was taken by Takagi, Orihara, and Riona to a place. Takagi invited him to play somewhere, but when Haruki asked the reason, Takagi shouted at the young man and threatened to bully Shiryuki if Haruki refused to come along. Haruki was forced to come along. They arrived at a small station. Takagi insisted that Haruki wait. Haruki asked a question, but his question angered Takagi. Haruki received a punch from Takagi, which immediately silenced the young man. He could only wait and do as he was told. Having silenced Haruki, the three of them decided to bring the old man who had bought the clothes to Haruki. Takagi exchanged messages with his customer. From the messages, they learned that the money had been placed in a changing room 500 meters away. Now that they had the key, the next step was to retrieve the money. Takagi received another message that the old man had found Haruki. The next message offered Takagi the chance to watch the old man devour Haruki. The old man admitted he liked being watched while he was performing. He even offered an additional 100,000 yen if Takagi would watch. Takagi considered the offer very lucrative. He didn't intend to tell Orihara and Riona, so he could enjoy the benefits alone. Takagi hurried to the location indicated in the message. The directions led Takagi into a fairly dark alleyway. He was almost there. Takagi was quite enthusiastic. He was excited to see Haruki's facial expression as the old man who bought him worked on it. With his cell phone camera on standby, Takagi immediately opened the door to the room indicated in the message. He was shocked to see the room filled with tattooed men who resembled thugs, or worse, gangsters. One of the tattooed men chased Takagi. Takagi ran as fast as she could to escape and escape the man's pursuit. She didn't have time to get her money. While running away, a hand and a voice guided her somewhere. Without thinking, Takagi followed the directions, even though she didn't know who was behind. The voice and hand. Takagi ran quite far, even entering a forest area. Upon regaining consciousness, Takagi felt nothing but gratitude for escaping the terrifying man's pursuit. However, he was shocked to see a figure in a cloak standing there. Takagi was even more shocked to discover that the cloak was Shiryuki. Takagi thanks Shiryuki. This time, Shiryuki is like a savior for Takagi in a difficult situation. Takagi still doesn't understand what is happening. Shiryuki then speaks and tells Takagi that the forest area they are in this time is very different from Tokyo. The large forest where they are standing this time is very comfortable for Shiryuki. Takagi is confused about what Shiryuki is talking about. Suddenly, Shiryuki hits Takagi with a hammer. Shiryuki continued, explaining that in that place, no one would know what they were doing. They wouldn't have to worry about anyone accidentally seeing them. Takagi tried to stop the bleeding from his nose and mouth. He was confused by what he was experiencing at that moment. Shiryuki continued her actions, this time striking Takagi with the hammer until it impaled him. Takagi, almost unconscious, asked why Shiryuki was abusing him. Of course, Shiryuki happily replied that he did it out of boredom. Shiryuki also verbally abused Takagi, who was beginning to lose consciousness. The young man then retrieved the hammer and resumed his torture. Time passed and the day had changed, and it was already morning. Takagi woke up after all the torture Shiryuki had inflicted. He was greeted by Shiryuki that morning, who said that Takagi's wake-up time was perfect for the preparations Shiryuki had made for him. Takagi was tied by Shiryuki to a tree, with a tree trunk with a conical tip between his legs. Takagi felt so tortured. He screamed and said that he would never forgive Shiryuki. Shiryuki didn't want to hear it. Takagi's chatter was too noisy, even though Haruki was suffering more than Takagi right now. Takagi didn't want to be compared to Haruki. For Takagi, Haruki was a weak man who kept crying over the death of his fish. Takagi just realized that Shiryuki did those things to Takagi solely for Haruki. Takagi began to suspect that Shiryuki had feelings for Haruki. With that suspicion, Takagi then said that Haruki was destroyed. He said this so that Shiryuki would be affected. Takagi even mentioned Haruki's past, where he had experienced sexual harassment from Riona. Shiryuki wanted to know if Takagi was that happy watching Haruki suffer. Takagi confirmed it. He was thrilled to see Haruki begging him and his two other friends to stop their torture. Haruki, while receiving Riona's abuse, kept whining and begging for him to stop, but none of his moans were heard. Shiryuki had had enough of Takagi's ranting. He then explained that the purpose of torture was to instill remorse and psychological damage in the target through manipulation. Seeing Takagi's apparent lack of remorse, Shiryuki gave up. Takagi was beyond repair. Ultimately, Shiryuki chose to send Takagi to hell, believing he would never repent. Shiryuki landed a single blow on Takagi, and the young man immediately screamed in pain. Shiryuki's only regret was that only the animals and trees had heard Takagi's final words. Shiryuki truly wished there was someone who could witness Takagi's end. Takagi knew his end would not be far off. Shiryuki repeated the action as many times as she pleased. Shiryuki had deleted all of Haruki's videos. He had even set up a fingerprint on Takagi's phone. He had seen countless other people's videos, but Shiryuki was only interested in Haruki. Shiryuki was curious and asked what it felt like to be a victim to Takagi. Takagi whimpered and begged to be let go. He promised not to bully Haruki again, but Shiryuki didn't care. Shiryuki asks why he should let Takagi go. He believes a bully should be punished. Another reason Shiryuki doesn't let Takagi go is because if Takagi doesn't disappear, Haruki won't date him. Shiryuki's sentence doesn't get any response from Takagi. Shiryuki wonders why the young man doesn't answer. Upon further inspection, it turns out that Takagi's existence will now disappear completely from the world. It's time for Shiryuki to catch Haruki's other bully. Shiryuki's next target is Riona, the girl who stomped on Haruki's precious fish. There are only 2 more targets left until Shiryuki can date Haruki. At school, Orihara and Riona began searching for Takagi, who never came. Not only that, but even Riona's messages were not read by Takagi. Takagi's disappearance occurred after they planned to sell Haruki, therefore, Haruki became the target again. Orihara approached Haruki to ask about Takagi's whereabouts, but Haruki himself did not know where Takagi had gone. Haruki only remembered that yesterday, Takagi called him to the bathroom and then beat him until he was unconscious. Then after a while, he had to wake up, but Takagi was not around him. Therefore, Haruki decided to go home. After that, he never saw Takagi again. Orihara and Riona did not believe what Haruki had just said and even accused the young man of lying to them. Orihara and Riona demanded that Haruki tell the truth and tell them where Takagi was. While the two still believed Haruki was lying, they overheard other students discussing the sighting of Takagi yesterday. The student who saw Takagi was a student whose house was near the spot where Takagi was chased by the black mob. From this story, they concluded that there must be a connection between what they saw and why Takagi didn't come to school that day. Orihara and Riona exchanged a look of surprise, especially when the student mentioned the black community. They couldn't fathom what Takagi had done. While the two bullies were confused, Shiryuki sat silently watching them from his seat. The beautiful young man smiled when the name of the black community was mentioned. The group's name didn't have a good representation in society, so if Takagi was really gone for a long time, his family and school wouldn't do much or care because of his connection to the black community. Not only that, the forest where Takagi was killed was very large and not many people came to visit, so it wouldn't be easy for Takagi's body to be found. Even if Takagi's body was found, the police would consider the black community the main suspect. Shiryuki, who had successfully eliminated one of Haruki's 3 bullies that day, felt in a very good mood. It was time for class to change. Shiryuki got up to invite Haruki to go to the next class together. At the same time, Orihara and Riona began to wonder what they should do about Takagi's disappearance. Riona couldn't believe what she had just heard, so the only solution Riona could propose to Orihara was to maximize their efforts to find Takagi with their own hands. Before Takagi died, when the dying young man still had a little consciousness, Shiryuki asked Takagi about who Riona was. Takagi, intimidated by Shiryuki, then explained that her Yama Riona was a girl who was still a virgin. That fact was quite impossible to be true, but the fact was clear. Riona was a figure who was very loyal to the name of the person she loved, and that person was her uncle. Takagi told how crazy Riona was regarding things related to her uncle because the girl was very obsessed with the man. Riona even immediately responded to a joke thrown by her friend, who said that a girl could not marry her uncle. The girl who had thrown the tent then became the target of Riona, and not only that, Riona even asked for help from Takagi and Orihara to molest the girl. Takagi had told him everything he knew about Riona. Therefore, he demanded Shiryuki's release, but the beautiful young man only became more convinced that Takagi, Riona, and Orihara were completely incompetent. Back during class, the majority of the students tried to focus on the teacher's explanation. Shiryuki arranged the board with a smile, wondering what she could do from now on. While the class was in session, it didn't stop Riona and Orihara's bullying. The target this time wasn't their classmates, but the teacher who was trying to explain things to the students. The homeroom teacher seemed disturbed by Riona's actions. The man clearly showed a very annoyed face at the girl. Previously, the teacher named Tokieta had intended to report the bullies during a teacher's meeting, but before that was done, Tokieta was first led to a place by Takagi, Orihara, and Riona. They then created an action scenario that showed scenes such as Tokieta trying to harass Riona, but the actual incident was the opposite. When the teacher was harassed, Riona recorded a video of the incident. Now, Tokieta is obedient to Riona, Takagi, and Orihara. When class was over, Riona tried to ask Haruki to hang out with her the next day. Riona asked Haruki on a date. The girl initially acted indifferent when Haruki refused her invitation, but Haruki eventually agreed to the date. It was not without reason. It turned out that Riona asked Haruki on a date so that her goal of selling Haruki to several old men could continue. Riona had become too comfortable torturing Haruki. The girl was increasingly impatient to meet Haruki the next day and sell him to the old man. Haruki was about to leave the classroom, but Shiryuki stopped him and asked if he was going on a date with Riona. Haruki didn't want to make a big deal out of it because no matter what, he would still be a victim in the end. Shiryuki was confused about how Haruki could feel okay being a victim. He also said that the weather had been raining a lot lately, and dating during that season would be a bit annoying. Shiryuki began to wonder. If Haruki wasn't going to be bullied anymore, what kind of face would he show Shiryuki? Class time has ended. Now the students are allowed to go home. The students say goodbye to each her, but at the same time, Haruki is confused as why Shiryuki is still following him. He asks Shiryuki the reason, but Shiryuki answers that it is Haruki himself. The reason why Shiryuki follows Haruki is Haruki. Haruki begins to suspect whether there is a possibility that Shiryuki is genuinely worried about him. Haruki begins to wonder if Shiryuki's words about eliminating the bullies are true. Haruki feels uncertain, especially since they still don't know each other very well. Shiryuki still wanted to go wherever Haruki went, and that afternoon they walked together to Inukai-sensei's office, in the biology room. Shiryuki made small talk, saying that she honestly didn't understand much about biology, but Haruki was confused because the key to the biology room had to be found to open it. Haruki found the situation quite odd, as the biology room door was usually always open. The only possible reason for the lock was that Inukai-sensei wasn't in the office at the time. Haruki gave up looking for the key and intended to return the next day. The young man then left, leaving Sir Yuki alone. As Haruki turned around, Sir Yuki sensed something behind the door. Haruki noticed his shift in focus and asked if something was wrong. Sir Yuki replied that nothing was wrong and then left with Haruki. From behind the door, inside the biology room, Inukai-sensei was actually attempting to hang himself. Elsewhere, Riona was meeting a man. The man seemed attentive to Riona. Riona maintained her attitude of being kind and sweet in front of the man. She even lied that she was close to her teacher at school. The man was Riona's uncle. Hearing Riona's story made the man reminisce a little about his past in high school. Talking about high school life, it would always be about romance. The man asked Riona if she had a crush on someone. Riona answered honestly that there was someone she liked. Riona seemed very happy talking to her uncle. She mentioned that his birthday was coming up soon. Riona explained that she had a part-time job so she could buy him a present this time. Her uncle seemed quite pleased and eagerly awaited his niece's gift. Shortly after, her uncle had to leave on urgent business. The two parted ways and returned to their respective activities. As soon as her uncle left, Riona's expression returned to its original state. She was upset that she couldn't give her uncle a gift that day and spend more time with the man she loved. That evening, as Riona walked home alone, she had already booked a nice hotel room for herself and her uncle. She planned to have dinner with him. Riona was in a desperate rush to sell Haruki as soon as possible to get the money. She was well aware that her uncle liked good girls, so she would never be able to honestly ask where the money to buy him the gift came from. Suddenly, someone grabbed Riona's wrist. It was Sir Yuki. Riona was surprised when Sir Yuki suddenly appeared in front of her. Sir Yuki asked the same thing he had asked Takagi, namely, why Riona bullied Haruki. If Sir Yuki had an assumption that the girl might like Haruki, Riona did not accept it. Where did the assumption come from? Sir Yuki was just guessing because, according to him, there are people who deliberately bully the people they like. Maybe Riona is that type of person, but Riona immediately denied the assumption. Riona will never be able to like Haruki because, according to her, Haruki is not handsome. Sir Yuki tightly gripped Riona's wrist and asked if she would bully Haruki again. Riona didn't answer but instead groaned in pain. Riona began to cry and whimper. She promised not to bother or bully Haruki again from then on. Sir Yuki wanted to make sure Riona would keep her promise. Riona answered briefly. Sir Yuki let go of her wrist and they began to part ways. Sir Yuki once again asked to make sure that Riona didn't like Haruki. When he was sure of the answer he received, Sir Yuki smiled and left. As soon as Sir Yuki was out of sight, Riona changed her attitude again. The girl was just lying. She wouldn't improve her attitude towards Haruki because bullying Haruki was a fun activity for the girl. Riona immediately opened her phone because she knew she was in dire need of money. Not only Haruki, but now Riona intended to sell Sir Yuki too, so that the profits she would get could double. All of this was done to commemorate her uncle's birthday, which had to be special. Riona thought enthusiastically about what gift might be suitable for her to give to her beloved uncle. Suddenly, from behind the bushes, a man appeared and smothered and drugged Riona from behind. Behind the scenes, Sir Yuki could be seen from a distance holding his cell phone. It seemed that the man who had just smothed Riona had obtained information about the girl through Sir Yuki. An unconscious Riona was taken to an empty building and tied to a chair. The man who had smothered and carried her was Inukai-sensei, a teacher who had lost his authority and respect among his students due to the actions of Riona and her friends. Inukai-sensei forcibly woke the unconscious Riona, claiming that students were forbidden from napping in class. Riona then woke up and was shocked to find Inukai-sensei in front of her. The girl was confused as to why she suddenly found herself in this situation. Inukai-sensei shouted and ordered Riona to stop talking because he was about to start his class. According to Inukai-sensei, someone like Riona desperately needed his guidance. Sir Yuki observed the situation from a distance without wanting to get involved. He simply wanted to know how Inukai-sensei would properly educate Riona. Flashback when Haruki tried to open the biology room, but it was locked, and he chose to return the next day. At that time, Sir Yuki realized something and chose not to go home with Haruki and said goodbye with the excuse that the English teacher needed Sir Yuki. He did not forget to add that day, Haruki had to go home alone. Honestly, he had to be alone, never said that he and Shiryuki would go home together. As soon as they parted, Shiryuki tried to see the inside of the biology room from the yard outside the window. He heard a sound coming from inside the room. Shiryuki then picked up a stone and broke the biology room window from the outside so he could get in. When he entered the room, he found Inukai-sensei hanging from the ceiling, but still alive and trying to maintain the rest of his life. Shiryuki was quite curious about what Inukai-sensei was doing in that place alone. Inukai-sensei didn't hear and was still struggling with his life. Shiryuki tried to guess that his homeroom teacher was trying to return to God by himself, but according to Shiryuki, Inukai was too good a person to be thrown away. Shiryuki could tell that Inukai-sensei had never thought of killing himself. The man only thought that he couldn't handle things like bullying because of what they had done to him before now. Shiryuki then approached Inukai-sensei and whispered. Shiryuki offered Inukai-sensei to take revenge first before the girl was truly taken by death. Back to the current timeline. Inukai-sensei, who had been allowed to vent his anger on Riona, no longer hesitated and held back. Riona still tried to avoid and asked for the bonds that wrapped around her body to be released immediately. Riona felt disgusted seeing the contents of her teacher's pants. Inukai-sensei suddenly shouted and discussed the case of a female student in Class B who had committed go to heaven some time ago, and behind the case, it turned out that Riona was also involved. Riona refused to be blamed. The girl felt innocent because the student who jumped from the top of the building was never asked to commit return to God independently. Riona only ever made the girl sleep with herself. After encouraging a girl to sleep with herself, Riona also laughed at the girl's actions, which also killed herself due to psychological damage. Riona laughed happily when she heard and recalled the incident. On the other hand, Inukai-sensei looked confused and wondered why the girl committed acts of bullying her peers. Inukai-sensei was at the peak of his emotions because he felt concerned about the fate of Riona's victim. The teacher felt empathy because he could also feel how much pain he felt when he was the target of bullying by an individual or group. Seeing how Inukai-sensei's face looked when angry made Riona shudder with fear. Inukai-sensei forcibly educates Riona while Shiryuki watches. After the lesson, Shiryuki is quite impressed with Inukai-sensei's extraordinary method of educating Riona. While continuing to stare at his phone, Shiryuki mutters that they need to let those fools who don't understand what it's like to experience pain firsthand. Riona was left alone in the abandoned building, her clothes disheveled. She looked depressed and frustrated, as the virginity she had tried so hard to preserve for her uncle had been forcibly taken. Her gaze was blank until a familiar male voice called her name. Riona was called by her uncle, who came for her. Riona, who saw her uncle coming, immediately ran to the man she loved. However, instead of a warm, comforting hug, Riona received a hard blow and a disgusted look. Her uncle pointed at the phone he was holding. The phone screen displayed a screen with a recording of Riona bullying another girl. Riona was wide-eyed and confused to explain. She didn't know where her uncle got the video. Her uncle only explained that he had just received a DM with the contents of the video from someone. Her uncle didn't expect his cute niece to act so cruelly. Riona tried to explain, but her uncle refused to listen. The uncle even refused to listen to the reasons and felt ashamed of having a relationship with Riona. Her uncle, the man Riona only loved, never wanted to see Riona again. Those words were a huge blow to Riona. The psychological impact she suffered led her to commit return to God, like her former bullying victims. News of Riona's situation had reached the school. Takagi was still missing, and at the same time, Inukai-sensei hadn't come in to teach. They had many questions, but no one answered them. Shiryuki felt at peace. He thought he could now understand people's feelings a little better than before. Haruki was surprised and then tried to call out to Shiryuki. Shiryuki noticed Haruki's presence. He asked Haruki what he needed from her. Haruki was a little suspicious of the previously cheerful Riona's disappearance. Shiryuki responded calmly to his suspicions, praising him for his understanding of others. He also suggested that Riona might regret Haruki's death. Shiryuki then asked if Haruki was happy about the disappearance of the bullies. Haruki didn't immediately confirm it, but the most important thing for him was that no one was hurt. Their class that day began, and Shiryuki started it with a happy feeling because there was only one more bully to get rid of before he could finally go on a date with Haruki and do various fun things together. While Shiryuki thought about the fun things he could do with Haruki, Haruki himself was still drowning in his gloomy feelings, while Orihara in the back seat looked very upset. During the break, Orihara then forcibly took Haruki to ask where Riona was because, from what Orihara knew, Riona had an agenda to date Haruki yesterday. Besides, the last contact with Takagi should also be Haruki. Orihara suspects that Haruki is involved in the disappearance of his two fellow bullies. Haruki is quite afraid of what Orihara will do to him, but he doesn't know anything about the disappearance of the two temple friends. Orihara thought Haruki would be happy if Takagi and Riona disappeared, because it could be assumed that his bullies were no longer there. However, Orihara is still there, and never has any intention of letting go of Haruki forever. That day, Orihara was deeply upset by Takagi's disappearance and Riona's go to hell. The young man began to wonder if his friends had been arrested by someone holding a grudge against them. However, when this assumption arose, Orihara had many people in mind who could have carried out the grudge. He began to think that the perpetrator might have been a victim of bullying they had previously bullied, but even so, this didn't stop Orihara from suppressing his bullying. As Orihara entered the classroom, he overheard several girls discussing Shiryuki's charms. He then remembered that Shiryuki had always hung out with Haruki, and that many strange incidents had occurred since Shiryuki transferred to their school. With this assumption, Orihara had an idea that he thought was quite good. After school, Shiryuki wanted to go home with Haruki, but Haruki reminded him that the paths between their houses were opposite each other. Haruki didn't want to bother Shiryuki even though Shiryuki had volunteered. Coinciding with this, a teacher still had business with Shiryuki, so the young man had to stay at school first. When Shiryuki left with the teacher, that's when Haruki was approached by Orihara. Orihara took Haruki to an empty room and tied him to a chair. Haruki remained silent, but politely asked if Orihara could stop doing this to him. Orihara then replied that just because Takagi and Riona were gone didn't mean she would stop either. Orihara had dedicated himself to harassing Haruki, and even if she were found out, she would try to cover it up. Orihara then knocked Haruki unconscious. After a while, Shiryuki, having just finished dealing with the teacher, was about to go home and grab his shoes from his locker. However, when he opened his locker, Shiryuki found Haruki's cracked glasses along with a note that read, "I'll be waiting in the gym equipment room." Shiryuki complied with the handwritten note and went to the equipment shed to investigate. When the young man opened the door, he was greeted by Orihara, who announced that he had arrived in the torture room and that the seduction show was about to begin. Haruki lay unconscious beneath Orihara. Shiryuki asks Orihara what he's up to. The young man replies that he's aware of Shiryuki's closeness to Haruki, so he thinks that if Hara can defeat Shiryuki in front of Haruki, Haruki will be happy. Orihara expressed his suspicions about Takagi and Riona's disappearance, but he no longer cared. His days were starting to get boring, so Orihara admitted that he needed a new game. The reason the young man discussed this with Shiryuki was that he felt Shiryuki would be perfect for his new game. Orihara then took out a cutter and pointed it in front of Shiryuki, saying that he needed Shiryuki to be able to prove his existence, that Orihara was the king. Haruki seemed to be starting to regain consciousness, and this made Orihara happy because it meant he could torture Shiryuki when Haruki confronted him. But suddenly, Shiryuki took a chair and hit Haruki with it, causing Haruki to faint again. Orihara was very shocked and confused by what Shiryuki did, because he thought that Haruki and Shiryuki were very close friends, but Shiryuki was honestly also confused about their relationship, which would remain the same. He thought that Haruki was more important than him. This confession made Orihara even more confused. It had to be important to Shiryuki. He would get abused by Shiryuki himself. Shiryuki was reluctant to answer, but he only said that Orihara would definitely be in trouble if anyone saw. Shiryuki then approached Orihara and casually asked about any possible date spots. As the two got closer, Shiryuki whispered that Orihara was his final target and that he would do his best to make him enjoy the experience. Haruki awoke from his stupor and was greeted by the panicked presence of his gym teacher, who found him tied to a chair, unconscious. He vaguely remembered being with Orihara. A shadow of someone barged in as the bound Haruki fell from his chair. His memory was hazy, but what came to mind was Yuki. At the same time, in another location, Orihara had just regained consciousness. The young man was confused and wondered where he was. His vision was still blurry, but there were no enter stickers around him. Orihara was shocked to realize he was hanging upside down. Orihara was tightly bound and dangling upside down like a bat, his feet up and his head down. Before Orihara could finish his shock, he was startled again by the figure of Yuki, who greeted the young man upon waking. With a happy expression, Yuki remained very friendly to Orihara. Upon realizing he wasn't alone, Orihara was convinced that what was happening to him was Yuki's doing. The young man then demanded answers about what Yuki had actually done to him. With an innocent expression, Yuki reminded Orihara that what he was doing now was because Orihara had previously said they would do something fun. Yuki even reminded him that Orihara had promised him at that time. Orihara didn't understand what Yuki was saying. Yuki then reminded the young man that Orihara had previously invited him to have fun. At first, they were confused about what to do with their fun, but then Yuki took the initiative to take an iron stool and smash it on Orihara. After hearing Yuki's ramblings, Orihara remembered what had caused him to faint, and that was Yuki. He then demanded to know why Yuki had done this to him. Orihara even shouted and insisted on Yuki untying the bonds that were attached to him, but the beautiful young man refused, as they were just about to begin what they had planned. Orihara no longer understood what Yuki meant. Yuki then said that they were right underneath an amusement park where there was a problem with the roller coaster. The roller coaster previously had a height of up to 50 meters, but was currently problematic and abandoned, where the problem was that the roller coaster stopped right at the top. When the incident was first discovered, 10 passengers waited for 2 hours without the arrival of even a tow truck. While waiting, the passengers were suspended in the air. In the middle of the story, Yuki suddenly asked Orihara about what the young man thought, what happened, and what the result was. Orihara was still trying to calm himself, but his calm feeling was continuously disturbed by Yuki's story, where the answer to the beautiful young man's question was that all passengers trapped on the roller coaster eventually died. Orihara began to feel anxious while Yuki laughed heartily. The beautiful young man then pinched Orihara's cheek and played with it. Yuki looked pleased and asked who Orihara might share the same goal with. Yuki no longer played Orihara's cheek, but instead opened a book Orihara had previously read while bullying Haruki. The book was titled The Encyclopedia of Torture. Orihara remained free, but the bonds around his legs tightened. Yuki then read the book, where the page he was reading stated that those who are hanging upside down experience 2 stages of suffering. Yuki then explained clearly what those who are hanging like Orihara will experience. The first stage is when their blood will rush to the head, causing several effects such as headaches, dizziness, mental confusion, bulging eyeballs, and then the blood vessels will finally rupture. These symptoms will eventually cause bleeding and blood to flow from the eyes, nose, and mouth. That was just the first stage. The next stage occurs when the internal organization rises. This will break the pressure on the diaphragm. As a result, the victim will have difficulty or even be unable to breathe freely. The things Yuki read were now happening directly to Orihara. Blood began to flow from his nose, and the young man had been feeling dizzy. Orihara still wondered why this had happened to him. Slowly, Orihara could feel himself dying. Orihara remembers his childhood. From a young age, the young man felt that he should be king of all. He had already experienced the pleasure of being at the top when he was young. Orihara was like someone at the top of the food chain. Bullying was fun for him and his friends. Orihara loved seeing others feel inferior to him. When his victims begged him to stop, Orihara was resentful, considering the request an order. Orihara would escalate his actions if the victims begged for forgiveness. For him, no one should defy his will. A king would never accept orders. Orihara loved the frightened faces of his victims, their trembling legs, because it was the best sight for him. He considered them his slaves. Orihara had even caused the death of a young girl due to his actions. The young man, along with 2 of his high school friends, intimidated a girl into jumping off the edge of a bridge. They claimed it was just a joke, but the terrified girl complied and died in a dry riverbed. Despite his actions, he faced no legal repercussions, leading Orihara to believe he was someone who would always be forgiven, no matter what he did. Therefore, Orihara was determined to continue being a figure who was always above others in his hierarchy. That was his intention, but what was happening to him right now was so opposite that it made him wonder why it could happen. Shiryuki was still there in front of Orihara, even occasionally playing with the young man's face, who was hanging upside down. The beautiful young man continued to talk to Orihara, but unfortunately, Orihara could no longer focus because of the current situation. Shiryuki wanted them to play longer, but it was important for Orihara to be released first so they could play fairly. The pain Orihara felt grew stronger. The high school boy was certain that if the situation continued like this and didn't subside soon, he too would soon pass away. Suddenly, Orihara heard footsteps nearby. At that moment, Shiryuki accidentally discovered a piercing Orihara had on his tongue. Shiryuki then forcibly removed the piercing from Orihara's tongue without the slightest bit of guilt or pity. He then asked to confirm whether his target had reached its limit or not. He also wanted to know if Orihara had begun to feel his lungs being squeezed, making it difficult to breathe or not. Shiryuki's curiosity was ignored by Orihara. Orihara was more enthusiastic because he felt a glimmer of hope after hearing footsteps nearby. Although he initially doubted there would be anyone else in the rubble, Orihara refused to be pessimistic and was confident that someone would help him. Believing that he would once again be forgiven, Orihara shouted as loudly as he could that he was there and would be a victim if he wasn't rescued soon. Suddenly, the owner of the footsteps, a third person, appeared among them, carrying a scapula and pliers. Shiryuki smiled as this third person appeared. He was Inukai-sensei. With everything Orihara and his gang had done to Inukai-sensei, his teacher had finally built up a grudge. Now it was time for Inukai-sensei to take his revenge. With the scapula in his hand, Inukai-sensei said that to understand Orihara, Inukai-sensei would dissect him. Orihara could only be hysterical with fear. Shiryuki laughed again while expressing his surprise at Orihara's previous sweet attitude, hoping someone would come to his aid. No one would be willing to help a student who was so addicted to bullying or abusing others. Seeing Orihara's increasingly hysterical expression made Shiryuki smile broadly. Inukai-sensei was there, thinking about the best way to make Orihara feel what Inukai-sensei had felt from Orihara and his gang's abuse of the teacher. Orihara now realized he was truly on the brink of death. He immediately cried out for forgiveness from Inukai-sensei and Shiryuki. Shiryuki smiled broadly, holding a lily. The beautiful young man happily announced that the time had finally come for him to fulfill his promise to Haruki. One thing Orihara hadn't understood until then was that no matter how much the young man begged for forgiveness, the harassment he'd inflicted on him never went away. Shiryuki reassured Orihara, inserting the lily into his tongue through the previously pierced hole, that if Orihara had survived that day, everything would have been meaningless. Finally, Shiryuki clasped his hands together as if praying or expressing condolences at a funeral. The beautiful young man then said, "My condolences." With a lily stuck in her tongue, Orihara continued to beg for forgiveness from anyone. Shiryuki simply crouched down, looking at Orihara and smiling cheerfully. Even though Orihara pleaded for his life with great concern, no one moved to let him go. Shiryuki stood up, feeling so puzzled. Why were people who often committed violence and abuse always the pitiful figures who begged for forgiveness at the end? For Shiryuki, the pleas for forgiveness and forgiveness expressed at the end were something said when wanting to save oneself. But no matter how concerning the pleas were, they were not all sincere pleas. Shiryuki confirmed her words to Inukai-sensei, but the young teacher did not respond because he was focused on thinking about how to process Orihara. Inukai-sensei plans to proceed with the dissection, and he will use scissors. Inukai-sensei continues to mutter that he will cut on the side part just before the anus. Shiryuki then apologizes to Inukai-sensei for having made the young teacher wait so long. Now, Inukai-sensei is free to do whatever he wants to Orihara because Orihara is now only a name. The young man has died, just like the victims of a roller coaster that got stuck and sent visitors upside down in the air. Next day, Shiryuki met Haruki, who was in front of the grave of his former pet fish. Haruki had a bandaged wound on his face. Shiryuki, who was worried, then asked about the young man's condition. Shiryuki asked as if he didn't know anything. He wanted to know about Haruki, who had fainted in the storeroom and even been rushed to the hospital. Haruki laughed awkwardly and answered that he was fine. He just felt that Haruki had hit his jaw hard earlier, so now it still hurts a little. Shiryuki showed his feelings of curiosity towards Haruki. Haruki then suddenly asked back to confirm the truth of his memory. He wanted to know if Shiryuki was in the storeroom yesterday. Shiryuki was surprised and asked back why Haruki asked, and assumed that. Haruki then replied that he felt like he had seen Shiryuki enter the storeroom that day, but his memory was vague and not very clear. Shiryuki was silent for a moment before finally denying it. Shiryuki said that Haruki's memory was wrong. If Shiryuki had indeed come to the storeroom that day, then she would definitely have taken Haruki to the hospital. Hearing this explanation made Haruki accept the facts presented by Shiryuki. Haruki was now convinced that his memory was indeed wrong because he had previously fainted in the storeroom. Around them, several male and female students were excitedly discussing the latest news regarding Inukai-sensei. Many articles had been published reporting that their teacher, Inukai-sensei, had been arrested by the police for a surgical procedure performed on his own student. Hearing this news made Haruki wonder why his teacher would do such a cruel thing. Shiryuki only responded casually that what Inukai-sensei did was probably because the teacher felt resentment. She then became more interested in asking, even though it was a loss, just to make sure that his crush was happy when he learned of Orihara's death. Haruki felt at a loss for an answer to that question. Honestly, what mattered to him was that no one else was hurt, but that didn't rule out the fact that the disappearance of the characters who frequently abused students brought him quite a sense of relief. Haruki still felt empathy and sympathy for Orihara and the other two people who frequently abused him. Even though those three people were bullies, what happened to them was too cruel for Haruki. The atmosphere between them became a little gloomy because Shiryuki suddenly remembered that there was something he wanted to show Haruki. Shiryuki rushed Haruki to the biology room where they first met by chance. Haruki wondered what exactly Shiryuki wanted to show him. That curiosity then disappeared when they arrived in the biology room. The aquarium that had been empty some time ago was now filled again with several fish of the same species as before, namely disco fish. Shiryuki explained that the fish had just arrived that morning and that he knew Haruki would love them. He wanted him to care for them like before. Haruki accepted Shiryuki's gift and entrusted him with caring for the fish. A look of happiness crossed Haruki's face after a long time. Shiryuki felt relieved to see his expression brighten again. He then changed the subject and wanted to remind him of their promise. Shiryuki happily asked Haruki if he was going to go out with him like he promised, because there were no more bullies. Haruki was quite confused by Shiryuki's words. He asked if Shiryuki was really serious with that promise. Shiryuki replied that he was a person who was always serious, even though his expression always seemed to smile in front of Haruki. Haruki did not immediately obey and fulfill his promise, but the young man instead said that how could the situation to be so compatible between the disappearance of the bullies and their promise? Event after event happened so strangely, starting from Takaga's disappearance, Ryona's death due to suicide, and the Orihara case incident, which was dissected by Inukai-sensei, seemed to have a causality that he did not know. Hearing this reason made Shiryuki laugh. In his mind, Haruki wondered what made Shiryuki laugh, even though what he had just said did not contain any jokes. Suddenly, Shiryuki, with a smiling but serious facial expression, made Haruki a little wary. Shiryuki asked Haruki back about what Haruki actually wanted to say. The question indirectly made Haruki feel intimidated. Haruki began to suspect that the incident that befell the three people who had bullied him was something that had been done and planned by Shiryuki. However, if it was indeed done by Shiryuki, only so that the promise that Haruki promised to Shiryuki could be fulfilled, then Shiryuki's actions and Shiryuki herself could be abnormal. Haruki was sure that the situation was very abnormal. He recalled his vague memories when he was half-conscious in the storeroom. Was Shiryuki's presence in the storeroom gym that day really not a coincidence? Haruki thought hard about all the existing situations, but suddenly, Shiryuki took over his focus again. The two of them had a tense silence, but when everything was almost certain, Shiryuki threw a joke and said that he was just joking to surprise Haruki. Shiryuki denied Haruki's allegations and said that she could not possibly do such an impossible thing. Shiryuki told Haruki not to take her words seriously. Haruki then laughed after Shiryuki denied his allegations. With a disappointed face, Shiryuki asked if Haruki really believed that he had done something cruel to the bullies. Karaoke then apologized while laughing, but with a joking gesture. Shiryuki said that she did not accept Haruki's apology because she felt hurt by Haruki's suspicions. Shiryuki chuckled, saying he was hurt and not forgetting to remind Haruki that he hated seeing anyone hurt. Haruki fell into Shiryuki's trap. The young man then asked what he could do to make Shiryuki forgive him. Shiryuki pretended to be thinking about what he could do to atone for his mistake. The beautiful young man then said he wanted to go to Haruki's house. Haruki paused for a moment in surprise, while Shiryuki tried to persuade him to go to his house. Haruki felt that it was too soon for Shiryuki to go to his house. That didn't deter Shiryuki, as the young man asked again if the time could be postponed to tomorrow. A decision hadn't been made yet, but suddenly the school bell rang. Haruki used that opportunity to escape, pretending to rush to class so he wouldn't be late for his lesson. Shiryuki could only shout from behind, asking Haruki not to avoid the subject. Haruki was still walking quickly towards his class while Shiryuki, who was following him from behind, was still trying to make a deal with Haruki so that tomorrow he could go to Haruki's house. At the same time, the two students passed a female teacher. The teacher who passed Shiryuki felt something so refreshing, like a flower. Flowers have a short life period during which they bloom and bear fruit. Flowers have beauty and fragility. That's how the female teacher described the figure of a teenager who is also the same as a flower. She felt that Shiryuki, who passed by, had a charm similar to a flower. Not to be guarded, for the female teacher, Shiryuki's charm looked delicious to the point of making her want to eat it. Shiryuki was excited to be able to go to Haruki's house, while the female teacher was excited to mess with Shiryuki. A female teacher at the school where Shiryuki and Haruki were studying was preparing to teach. She looked in the mirror and adjusted her makeup while humming a few famous lines from the story of Snow White. The female teacher said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of them all?" she asked, but then answered herself that of course the most beautiful figure of all was herself. She was the most beautiful of them. However, behind her statement, her appearance was actually not that beautiful, coupled with her attitude like a disgusting predator. After feeling that her makeup was on point, the female teacher was ready to start her work. In class, Shiryuki looked very gloomy. Haruki tried to persuade Shiryuki not to be angry with him, but the beautiful young man complained to Haruki, who had previously promised to let him come to his house to play. Haruki didn't completely reject Shiryuki's visit to his house, but according to Haruki, it was too soon for Shiryuki to visit Haruki's house when they not really close. Honestly, for Haruki, it was okay for Shiryuki to come to his house, but only if the house was empty with his family members not at home. Haruki was sure that if Shiryuki suddenly came to his house when his parents were home, Haruki's parents would bombard Shiryuki with questions about how Haruki was at school. What worried Haruki was if Shiryuki started telling Haruki's parents about Haruki's school life. The worst possibility was that Haruki's parents would find out that their eldest son had been the target of abuse by several students, and that fact could later hurt his parents. Haruki didn't want his parents to know about Haruki's school life, especially when he was the victim. It was a fact he had to hide forever. However, Haruki couldn't bear to see Shiryuki constantly depressed because of his decision, so he decided to tell her that the beautiful young man could come to his house next week. Shiryuki, who had initially ignored Haruki, then turned around with a cheerful expression and a feeling of great joy. He held out her pinky finger and asked Haruki to keep his "Miss C this time." Haruki thought hard about whether Shiryuki might have thought that they were currently dating because, according to Haruki, their promise to be date together had not been fulfilled. After all, according to Haruki, it was not Shiryuki who had ended the abuse at their school. Besides, according to Haruki, the promise was also irrelevant because Shiryuki and he were both men. Therefore, he thought the promise he made would turn into a friendship rather than a couple. Haruki gave his little finger and then linked it with his thumb. That meant they had promised that Shiryuki would go to Haruki's house next week. The other students in the class were chatting amongst themselves, feeling the peace in their classroom now that the bullies were gone. They were grateful that with the three troublemakers gone, their school life could continue peacefully and happily. Now everyone could enjoy their youth freely. It was then that Haruki suddenly remembered that their physical education class was about to start. They hurriedly left to change into their gym uniforms. At the same time, in another room, a student named Kimura was being eaten out by a female teacher. One of the main reasons the female teacher pursued her profession was so she could admire and enjoy young flowers as much as she wanted. After the female teacher finished plucking Kimura's virginity, She immediately cleaned up her tracks and ordered him to hurry back to class because class was about to start. The female teacher felt that what she had done was starting to be in vain. The best age for a boy is between 16 and 17 years old. The body changes from a child to a young man in seconds. When they turn 18, from their muscles to their body hair and odor, everything transforms into a man. The female teacher peeked through the curtains and windows. Using binoculars, she saw Shiryuki in his gym class. Shiryuki was warming up and stretching. Seeing how lithe Shiryuki's body was made, the female teacher tempted him. Shiryuki looked like a doll. The beauty of the high schooler before Shiryuki hit puberty had increased her appetite in other ways. Shiryukiheim was a luxurious, high-class dish that she desperately wanted to consume every inch of. The passionate female teacher was named Fudo. The students often call her Fudo-sensei. Fudo-sensei teaches chemistry class. Even though her true nature is very disgusting, Fudo-sensei can teach very well. Many students find it very easy to understand what Fudo-sensei teaches. Fudo-sensei made this natural because up until now, she had always simply taught her students so that even stupid monkeys would definitely understand his knowledge. That day, Fudo-sensei also had a class that Shiryuki also attended. After explaining and assigning the students, Fudo-sensei's attention was immediately drawn to Shiryuki, who seemed focused on the book but lacked enthusiasm or high interest. Fudo-sensei covered part of her face with the book as she looked closely at Shiryuki. She realized that Shiryuki had very long and curly eyelashes. That made Fudo-sensei's lust increase. She wanted to see Shiryuki's eyelashes shaking uncontrollably in pleasure. Confusion, shame, and pleasure mixed with something sticky. Fudo-sensei wanted Shiryuki to look at her with tears in his eyes. Fudo-sensei really looked forward to the day and the moment when she could realize what was in her mind about Shiryuki. Class was over. Shiryuki was asked by Fudo-sensei to help her return some chemicals to their original shelves. Fudo-sensei thanked Shiryuki for his willingness to help clean up. Shiryuki then replied that he would really appreciate his teacher if he could return to class immediately. In his mind, Shiryuki wanted to see Haruki immediately. The expression on Haruki's face was something Shiryuki couldn't stand. Fudo-sensei made small talk with Shiryuki to keep him trapped there longer. She brought up the topic of conversation, explaining that she had previously heard about Shiryuki always getting perfect scores on exams and coming from a prestigious school before transferring there. Fudo-sensei pretended to ask because she wanted to know what kind of classes were in Shiryuki's old school. Fudo-sensei was pleased to learn that Shiryuki was an intelligent student. Shiryuki didn't care about the various things Fudo-sensei said. He simply asked to confirm whether the shelf where the chemicals were stored was unlocked. Fudo-sensei answered as she rose from her chair. On the shelf were several toxic substances, like hydrochloric acid or sulfuric acid. They should be on a locked shelf for the safety of the students. Fudo-sensei moved closer to Shiryuki while explaining the chemicals on the shelf. Fudo-sensei pressed her body against Shiryuki. One hand began to feel Shiryuki's front body, while the other hand pointed towards the chemical substance. Fudo-sensei's lips were near Shiryuki's ear, speaking tea. He names of the chemical substances while breathing on the beautiful young man. Fudo-sensei also explained that some chemicals are dangerous depending on how they are handled. Then suddenly, when Shiryuki had been silent all this time, the young man asked in a flat tone why Fudo-sensei touched him carelessly. Fudo-sensei was still unaware that her actions had been noticed. She was even happier when she saw Shiryuki, who looked cute in her eyes when Shiryuki was stiff like that. Fudo-sensei almost licked and devoured Shiryuki's ears, which she thought looked delicious. But before that disgusting thing happened, Shiryuki turned to the side with an embarrassed expression and then asked what exactly her chemistry teacher was doing to him. Fudo-sensei was shocked when she was almost caught red-handed. The woman was confused when she had to answer Shiryuki's sudden question. Shiryuki again told Fudo-sensei honestly that the sound of Fudo-sensei's breath in his ears sounded very disgusting. He even said that he thought there was a pig that had escaped from its pen around them. Fudo-sensei was very shocked when she was compared to a pig. Shiryuki took a chemical substance from a jar and went back to class. Fudo-sensei didn't realize the chemical was missing. She was more surprised by Shiryuki's attitude and behavior. Despite being caught red-handed by Shiryuki, Fudo-sensei dismisses it as Shiryuki's stupidity. Fudo-sensei thought she had just scared Shiryuki. A few days later, in Fudo-sensei's chemistry class, just before class ended, Fudo-sensei was about to announce her students. Her students were then very enthusiastic about the announcement that their teacher would make. Fudo-sensei said that some time ago, she had given some chemistry problems for them to solve. Fudo-sensei honestly made it the Japan National High School Chemistry Competition. There was one student who managed to win the competition, and that student was Shiryuki. All the students cheered and celebrated Shiryuki's success, except Shiryuki himself. Fudo-sensei handed over the medals and trophies that Shiryuki was supposed to receive, but instead of a happy twinkle in his eye, Shiryuki gave Fudo-sensei a sharp, intimidating stare. The woman noticed this. Fudo-sensei was disappointed with Shiryuki's reaction. According to her, Shiryuki was no longer useful to her, even though he had the looks, charm, and great willpower. Fudo-sensei was already convinced that she had to give up on Shiryuki. However, Fudo-sensei then saw Haruki approaching Shiryuki with a proud expression. Haruki praised Shiryuki's achievements. When Haruki arrived, Shiryuki's expression also changed in an instant to a cheerful one. Shiryuki noticed that Haruki had changed lately. He seemed more energetic lately. He suspected it might be because the abuse had gone. Then there wouldn't be anything else bothering them. That was what Shiryuki thought. However, his expression was noticed by Fudo-sensei. The woman was amazed to see the two of them smile. Her appetite for the young leaves was revived. Break time has arrived. Shiryuki felt very happy when Haruki praised him. His praise made Shiryuki grateful because he was good at chemistry. He thought maybe Haruki would be happy if Shiryuki taught him about what Shiryuki had mastered during their date. His thoughts stopped for a moment. He didn't see Haruki when break time was almost over. Haruki said goodbye to Shiryuki that there was something Haruki had to do, but Shiryuki didn't know where Haruki went. The young man thought maybe they wouldn't be able to have lunch together that day. At the same time, in the chemistry practice room, Haruki was meeting with Fudo-sensei. The young man had previously apologized to Fudo-sensei for disturbing her during break time. Haruki had some questions that he couldn't answer, so he wanted to ask Fudo-sensei. Fudo-sensei didn't mind Haruki's request. Haruki really admired Shiryuki's ability to study chemistry because he was very bad at that subject. Haruki began to think about asking Shiryuki to teach him in the future. While Haruki was enthusiastic, Fudo-sensei had indecent thoughts about Haruki. He felt the young man looked adorable when observed up close. If he had known Haruki would be so adorable, Fudo-sensei felt a little disappointed for not protecting his prey from the start. Fudo-sensei had known about the acts of abuse and harassment that befell Haruki. Fudo-sensei also realized that even though Haruki had gone through something very terrible, the young man remained silent and did not report it to anyone. With this suspicion, Fudo-sensei felt that Haruki would be able to become his obedient prey. Fudo-sensei spoke to Haruki and said that Haruki just had to try harder. Fudo-sensei then said that Haruki's glasses looked dirty. She lent Haruki her handkerchief to clean the dust on his glasses. When Haruki took off his glasses to wipe them with Fudo-sensei's handkerchief, the woman could clearly see Haruki's face without his glasses. Haruki's face looked adorable and received an 85 point from Fudo-sensei. After finishing wiping the dust off his glasses, Haruki returned the handkerchief to its owner, Fudo-sensei. Fudo-sensei asked if she could ask for compensation from Haruki. Haruki, who felt indebted to Fudo-sensei, then agreed. He would help Fudo-sensei with whatever he could do. In class, Shiryuki ate alone. He was getting bored waiting for Haruki, who was late even when lunchtime was almost over and Shiryuki's food was almost finished. At the same time, it wasn't that Haruki didn't want to go back to class and eat, but in the chemistry room, he was the one being eaten. A jar of liquid chemicals was seen lying there, spilling its contents. Some of Haruki's clothes and pants were wet. He lay on the table while Fudo-sensei was almost perfectly on top of the young man, slowly, one by one, unbuttoning Haruki's shirt, buckle, and pants. Shiryuki waited in class, his enthusiasm returning when he saw Haruki return. However, Haruki returned in his gym uniform, his expression grim. Shiryuki realized something must have happened, but when he asked him what was wrong, he replied listlessly that nothing was wrong. Haruki took out his bento and said he hadn't eaten yet, so he would eat soon. He asked if he had been waiting for him to eat with him. Haruki apologized for not being able to eat with him that day. Shiryuki paused, then replied that it was okay. Shiryuki was stunned when Haruki said, "Sorry." He thought perhaps he was eager to eat with him. Usually when Shiryuki invited him to eat with him, Haruki always looked embarrassed. Haruki ate silently. He seemed unable to enjoy his meal. His gaze was blank, as if something had happened that had made him lose his appetite and his sense of enjoyment. He remembered, while in the chemistry lab, he offered what he could to help Fudo-sensei. Fudo-sensei asked Haruki to leave the dehydrator and help her put the chemicals on the shelf. Haruki did as Fudo-sensei asked, even asking to make sure the place was right or wrong first. Fudo-sensei stood up and approached Haruki, pretending to ask the young man to turn around so she could see and make sure the chemicals were correct. Haruki accidentally let go of what he was holding. The bottle labeled sodium hydroxide spilled onto his clothes. Haruki wanted to handle his wet clothes, but Fudo-sensei stopped him. She said that the liquid was a dangerous substance. If Haruki left it alone, his skin would start to ulcerate. Fudo-sensei recklessly forced Haruki to take off his outer coat. Haruki was shocked, but Fudo-sensei was lying. Previously, Fudo-sensei had replaced the contents of the sodium hydroxide bottle with water. Haruki wanted to take care of himself, but Fudo-sensei kept clinging to him and forced him to undress. Haruki still wanted to take care of himself, but Fudo-sensei, with a very disgusting facial expression, said that it would be very dangerous for students to touch the chemical liquid. Haruki was forced to take off all his clothes before everything became a disaster. Fudo-sensei would replace Haruki's uniform with a sports uniform. The shirt that was already unbuttoned allowed the woman's hands to freely feel Haruki's body and skin directly. Her lust was really visible through Fudo-sensei's uncontrolled facial expression, very disgusting with her tongue constantly sticking out. Fudo-sensei brought her face closer to Haruki's body to get a better look. Her excuse was to examine him, but it was actually just for fun. His shirt, which was originally neat, was now torn and looked messy. Fudo-sensei could clearly see Haruki's upper body. The appearance of a pubescent teenager with his still smooth chest and stomach was something delicious in the eyes of that crazy woman. With her handkerchief, Fudo-sensei rubbed Haruki's body. The friction in several sensitive areas made Haruki display the expression Fudo-sensei so desired. Haruki tried to hold back as much as possible. Haruki gasped slightly. Seeing Haruki's expression made Fudo-sensei lose control even more, and he wanted to immediately suck all over Haruki's youthful body. Without permission, Fudo-sensei began to undo Haruki's belt. The young man realized and was shocked. He tried to refuse and said he would do it himself. Fudo-sensei was reluctant to let go of her prey. She alleged that it might not hurt now, but it is still dangerous. The woman pretended to be worried that it would leave scars on Haruki, so she emphasized that Haruki only needed to lie down on the table. Haruki was honestly reluctant, not willing to have his sensitive part watched by his chemistry teacher, but he couldn't refuse. Fudo-sensei was getting worse. Seeing Haruki's expression made her even more unable to hold back. Haruki tried his best to scream for Fudo-sensei to stop, but was shocked to hear his teacher's words after his refusal. Fudo-sensei said to make sure Haruki was good at keeping quiet about those kinds of things. With a disgusting, lustful face, the woman said that she knew Haruki had been the target of bullying all this time. Haruki was speechless. Fudo-sensei threw a threat disguised as praise that Haruki was an extraordinary person and would find it very uncomfortable if other teachers found out what they were doing. With this threat, Haruki had lost all hope. He could no longer act. Fudo-sensei promised Haruki that if Haruki was good, she would reveal his chemistry score. That way, Haruki would be recommended to a good school. However, if Haruki behaved badly, Fudo-sensei threatened to spread Haruki's situation to the whole world. Among the jars and bottles of chemical liquid, Fudo-sensei placed a camera to record them. Not stopping there, Fudo-sensei again threatened Haruki that if he behaved badly, Fudo-sensei would target Shiryuki. The threat immediately stunned Haruki. He felt he should not let his teacher hurt Shiryuki. Haruki felt depressed and down because he had only felt pleasure recently for a short time. He no longer experienced bullying and began to make friends. But unfortunately, the world he lived in was full of monsters. Therefore, he concluded that someone had to be punished. Haruki was no longer rebellious. He surrendered even though his body began to be colonized by the figure of his chemistry teacher, who was very disgusting in her behavior. While Haruki was in so much pain and unable to do anything, Fudoi-sensei began to savor her sweet treat. The smell of pure fabric conditioner, with a hint of the teenager's sour odor, was palpable. A beautiful stomach without a single strand of body hair, Haruki now earned a 95 point for his body. Fudoi-sensei could no longer hold back. The woman began licking Haruki. Fudoi-sensei felt she understood teenage students very well. Young boys tended to be very passionate about adult things, so all they needed to do was fall into this sea of pleasure once and submit themselves fully. She thought they would definitely hate it at first, but if they were threatened, they wouldn't be able to go back on their word. That was what Fudoi-sensei had believed all along, but she hadn't even noticed that Haruki wasn't enjoying the service at all. Back to Shiryuki. The young man seemed so happy to see Haruki, who was eating silently. He admired Haruki, who looked so cute in his eyes. Shiryuki then realized and felt confused why Haruki changed his uniform to a sports uniform. The girls in his class were curious why Haruki had just eaten his bento even though class was about to start. Haruki replied that he could only return to class and eat his lunch because Fudoi-sensei had something to do with him beforehand. Hearing that answer made Shiryuki surprised and suspicious of something. The girls laughed while wondering what help Fudoi-sensei asked from Haruki. They even realized that Fudoi-sensei only relies on boys to help her with things. Haruki could only laugh awkwardly, unable to answer the girls. Shiryuki grabbed Haruki and led him to the toilet. Shiryuki didn't hear him ask where they were going and that they would be late for class if they left now. In the toilet, Shiryuki confronted Haruki and asked him to tell the truth. What exactly had Fudoi-sensei done to Haruki? Shiryuki wanted to know the truth. Haruki was stunned for a moment. The situation became awkward for Haruki. He then explained what happened to his clothes. Haruki said that he was careless and spilled a bottle of chemicals. Haruki then changed his clothes because they were wet from the spilled chemical liquid. Shiryuki was stunned and couldn't believe it. Haruki then said that the chemical liquid that wet him at that time, if he's not mistaken, was sodium hydroxide. Hearing the name of the chemical solution made Shiryuki rush to ask Haruki to show the traces. Shiryuki looked at Haruki's body to examine it, but there were no traces of ulcers or burns. Haruki said that he was fine. He even apologized for making Shiryuki worry. Haruki trembled. His expression looked very uncomfortable. Shiryuki wanted to ask, but Haruki said that no one had done anything strange to him. In fact, Shiryuki was the one acting strange. Haruki left and asked Shiryuki to come back soon so they wouldn't miss class. Shiryuki remained silent, frozen behind him. Her expression returned to seriousness. He wanted to know what had really happened to Haruki. Shiryuki began to suspect that Fudoi-sensei had done something suspicious to Haruki. In the chemistry room, Fudoi-sensei was enjoying her time by looking at photos and videos of the flowers she had eaten and collected on her phone. Her relaxing time was interrupted by someone knocking on the door, looking for Fudoi-sensei. At the door was Shiryuki, sweating, hot, and complaining that he felt feverish. Shiryuki also modified his expression to suit Fudoi-sensei's taste. Of course, seeing the flower she had initially been unable to pick come to her by itself made the woman ambitious again. She immediately invited Shiryuki to come in. Fudoi-sensei asked Shiryuki if he should go to the infirmary first. Shiryuki replied that it seemed the people in charge were away. Fudoi-sensei's heart grew brighter, feeling that her time had come. She pretended to grab a thermometer to check Shiryuki's temperature. When the woman turned around, unsuspecting, Shiryuki threw a microscope at her head, knocking Fudoi-sensei unconscious. When she came to, she was in a strange place and her clothes were partially missing. Around her, Fudoi-sensei saw several pigs in their pens. She didn't realize that Shiryuki was there, sitting behind a log behind Fudoi-sensei. The woman didn't realize until Shiryuki took a picture of the confused Fudoi-sensei and complimented her pose. Fudoi-sensei also had her hands tied behind her back. Only her feet were left free. With a wide smile and her phone ready for the camera, Shiryuki prepared to broadcast. The female pigs mate fight all over the world. The phone Shiryuki was holding at that time belonged to Fudoi-sensei. The woman was a little relieved because her phone was locked, but Shiryuki was able to guess the passcode and easily unlock the phone. Shiryuki saw that Fudoi-sensei had used many similar tricks to deceive other students. Shiryuki was curious to know how many students had fallen victim to the woman. Fudoi-sensei denied what Shiryuki had said. She said she hadn't done anything. Shiryuki guessed that the woman had lied to the students by saying the water was sodium hydroxide, knew that sodium hydroxide was a dangerous substance. Sensei also knew how dangerous it was, being a chemistry teacher. Shiryuki wanted Fudoi-sensei to experience firsthand how dangerous the liquid was. She then poured a bottle directly onto the woman's head. Fudoi-sensei was so scared that she screamed hysterically and writhed, but nothing happened. Shiryuki lied just like Fudoi-sensei. The bottle was just water. Fudoi-sensei was quite scared, asking what Shiryuki would do to her. The woman still had the nerve to threaten Shiryuki that she would report to the police about what the beautiful young man did to her. Shiryuki laughed. How could he let his target do something boring like that? Fudoi-sensei started asking what Shiryuki wanted because if it was money, then the woman could give as much as she wanted. Shiryuki laughed a little because he was misunderstood. He didn't want anything, he just really hated Fudoi-sensei. Shiryuki asked Fudoi-sensei to look behind her. There were several male pigs in the pen. Fudoi-sensei was especially afraid of what Shiryuki might do to him with those pigs. Shiryuki briefly explained the fact that pig semen was 30 times more effective than human semen. Another fact was that when the birth season was underway, the male pig's desires also increased sharply. Shiryuki released a large male pig from the pen. The pig immediately approached Fudoi-sensei, attempting to mate with her. The pig started sniffing Fudoi-sensei's feet. The woman lay face down, hoping to escape with that position, but unfortunately the pig got access to the woman's backside. Fudoi-sensei shouted for Shiryuki not to do that to her. She couldn't do it with a pig because it would be too disgusting. However, Shiryuki asked in surprise, why couldn't Fudoi-sensei do it? According to Shiryuki, what was happening right now should be very good for Fudoi-sensei. Because in the eyes of the pigs, there was no one more beautiful than Fudoi-sensei. Shiryuki was still standing by with Fudoi-sensei's phone and recording. He said that round 2 of the pigs' mating battle was about to begin. Fudoi-sensei could only shout angrily at Shiryuki and at the pig who was lusting after her. Fudoi-sensei saw the door slightly open. The woman quickly got up, jumped, and tried to escape. She thought Shiryuki would just stay still, but in fact the young man took out a roll of string with the end attached to a modified belt head like a fishing hook. Shiryuki threw it, and it landed right in Fudoi-sensei's nasal cavity. Shiryuki asked why his teacher was running away. Fudoi-sensei asked him to stop, but Shiryuki was sure stop was said only for Fudoi-sensei's own benefit. He then wondered if the woman stopped when Haruki asked her to. Shiryuki happily said that Haruki had seemed very happy lately. He even saw that Haruki had started smiling more often. This started to happen when the bullying had disappeared. Shiryuki also said that Haruki had promised him to date Shiryuki as well. However, Shiryuki suddenly realized that a certain pig had become another obstacle. With a serious and disgusted expression, Shiryuki earnestly asked, "Do you dare to touch Haruki?" Fudoi-sensei couldn't focus. Her nose aching and her backside constantly being touched by the pig's tongue. Seeing how the pig seemed so attentive to Fudoi-sensei made Shiryuki smile happily. Shiryuki still let Fudoi-sensei feel tortured by the male pigs there. The woman begged Shiryuki to stop and promised to grant and do whatever Shiryuki asked. Shiryuki replied that Fudoi-sensei should just enjoy her time with the piggies. Suddenly, Shiryuki remembered that Fudoi-sensei really liked young people, so he brought a male piglet too. Fudoi-sensei screamed for her student to stop showing the pigs. Shiryuki was confused. What should he do if not that? Fudoi-sensei tried to get Shiryuki to stop. She explained what would happen to the young man if he continued his behavior. Shiryuki would be arrested and wouldn't be able to go to school anymore. If that were the case, Shiryuki also felt he would be sad if he couldn't see Haruki. Fudoi-sensei said that she wouldn't report Shiryuki if he stopped right then. Fudoi-sensei even offered Shiryuki a unique experience if he wanted, but the offer only made Shiryuki feel even more disgusted with his chemistry teacher. Shiryuki says that Fudoi-sensei should feel what Haruki felt when the pigs tortured her. Shiryuki pulls the string but then releases his grip. As a result, Fudoi-sensei falls to the ground, and the male boars immediately swarm her for their share. Shiryuki leaves Fudoi-sensei with the pigs, avoiding interrupting their romantic scene. Sometime later, when Fudoi-sensei was finished, she crawled out. She kept muttering that she would never forgive him for what he had done to her that day, but Shiryuki was waiting by the door. Shiryuki's ordeal wasn't over yet. With a dog collar, the beautiful young man put it tightly around Fudoi-sensei's neck. Shiryuki pulled and dragged Fudo-sensei to a nearby abandoned cabin. There, he felt he could leave Fudo-sensei safely. There, Fudo-sensei could play with many other animals. According to Shiryuki, this could be a fun experience for Fudo-sensei. A few days later, rumors and gossip circulated about Fudo-sensei. The chemistry teacher suddenly disappeared without a trace. Rumors circulated that Fudo-sensei had molested several students. The video had even been circulated to the Board of Education. Hearing this made Haruki furious. Suddenly, Shiryuki appeared and greeted Haruki. Haruki returned his greeting and then asked if Fudo-sensei had done something to Shiryuki. Shiryuki asked again what kind of thing the woman could have done to him. Haruki didn't answer. He only said that a few strange rumors were circulating. But if Shiryuki hadn't experienced anything, Haruki was quite grateful to hear it. Shiryuki showed a confused expression at what Haruki had just said to him. Haruki just smiled and said that he thought it would be bad if something happened to Shiryuki. Hearing those words made Shiryuki even more amazed by Haruki. In Shiryuki's view, Haruki was someone who, despite having experienced bad things, still worried about others more than himself. Shiryuki then suddenly remembered the pinky promise they both made. The beautiful young man today again asked Haruki to let him go to Haruki's house to play. Finally, what Shiryuki wanted came true. That day, the two of them went home together to Haruki's house. As the host, Haruki asked Shiryuki to wait in his room while Haruki went down to the kitchen to bring water and snacks. When he returned to his room, he was confused as to why Shiryuki suddenly wore glasses. Shiryuki cheerfully replied that he just wanted to look like Haruki. Haruki asked to make sure that Shiryuki's eyesight was not bad and was fine. He then said that Shiryuki looked better without glasses. Hearing this, Shiryuki immediately took off his glasses. The two of them were in their room. Shiryuki was enthusiastic about telling a story, while Haruki was anxious about his parents' arrival at a critical time. Shiryuki realized that Haruki was distracted. Shiryuki even made Haruki unable to deny that he hadn't been listening to his story before. The young man then wanted to refill their drinks in the kitchen, but this time, Shiryuki chose to come downstairs. While downstairs, a girl had just come home from school. The girl was Haruki's younger sister. Haruki introduces Shiryuki to his sister as his classmate, but Shiryuki seems dissatisfied when Haruki refers to him only as a classmate. Haruki's sister seems indifferent to Haruki, but honestly, she also cares about Shiryuki as a friend. Haruki and Shiryuki return to the room. Shiryuki then looks at Haruki's photo album from when he was little. Shiryuki just found out that Haruki has a younger sister. Shiryuki now feels even more curious about Haruki. Akari, Haruki's younger sister, seemed curious about her brother's friend. Shiryuki's seemingly kind and good-looking figure made Akari realize that Shiryuki would definitely succeed in Hai's life, but what confused her was how someone like Shiryuki could be close to her brother. The girl sneaked around to observe her brother's interaction with Shiryuki to get a clearer picture. At that time, Haruki was explaining the photos that Shiryuki had pointed to. The album they were looking at was an album containing Haruki's childhood photos. Haruki happily explained that the photo showing him and Akari as children was proof that the siblings were very close. At that time, wherever Haruki went, Akari would follow him. Haruki realized that his closeness with his sister was not like before, but even so, Akari was still an adorable little sister whom he loved very much. Because the girl was a beloved member of his family, Haruki wanted Shiryuki to be able to have a good relationship with her. Shiryuki agreed to Haruki's request. As long as the person was an important figure for Haruki, Shiryuki would guarantee that he would also appreciate them. Akari was still watching the interaction between the two young men from behind the door, but the girl felt something strange between them. Suddenly, the interaction she saw made her even more confused. Suddenly, Haruki cried without knowing why. Seeing this incident made everyone amazed. Haruki felt like he couldn't stop his own tears. He suspected that the outburst of his feelings was because it had been so long since he last had a long conversation with a friend. Haruki felt grateful and very thankful to Shiryuki for wanting to be good friends with him. Shiryuki was certainly very happy with what he had just said. Suddenly, Shiryuki leaned his face very close to Haruki's face. This incident made Akari and Haruki very surprised. Shiryuki did that because he saw a strand of hair on Haruki's shoulder, while Akari outside had already assumed that the two people she was monitoring were kissing. but after hearing Shiryuki say that it was just a strand of hair, Akari was relieved for a moment. Shiryuki invited Haruki to go out for a walk. When Haruki got ready, Shiryuki put the strand of hair in his pocket. Akari, who was initially calm, suddenly panicked again. While Akari was still confused, Shiryuki suddenly looked at her. The next day at school, Shiryuki waited for Haruki, who was on duty putting up posters. Haruki had asked Shiryuki to go home first, but the beautiful young man preferred to go home with Haruki. At the same time, Akari was sneaking into her brother's school wearing a sports uniform. She infiltrated because she felt something was wrong with Shiryuki. Akari arrived in front of Haruki's class. The girl saw her brother helping a girl whose finger had been cut by paper. Haruki put a band-aid on the girl's finger. Shiryuki looked shocked seeing Haruki's actions. The girls saw Haruki's awkward behavior and began to think that Haruki was really adorable. Haruki felt embarrassed. He acted immediately to treat the girl and carried a band-aid everywhere because of his sister. Haruki then excused himself to get more glue. The girls began to think Haruki was very adorable. They even asked Shiryuki's opinion. Instead of responding, Shiryuki said that he could help Haruki herself, so the girls could go home first. The girls were initially hesitant, but because Shiryuki insisted, they hurried home. When Shiryuki was alone, the beautiful young man took out a cutter and cut his finger until it bled. Akari was shocked and felt the need to record it to show Haruki. However, in her panic, Akari dropped her phone, making Shiryuki realize there was someone else besides him. Akari rushed to run away in fear. The girl immediately labeled Shiryuki dangerous. Shiryuki had already reached for the door and opened it. Akari accidentally bumped into her older brother. She felt a little relieved to see Haruki there. Haruki was shocked. What exactly was his little sister doing at his school? Before she could answer, Shiryuki came over to greet Akari, revealing his bleeding finger. Haruki panicked when he saw Shiryuki injured. Shiryuki said he accidentally cut himself while helping put up the poster. Akari was shocked again by Shiryuki's untrue words. Haruki didn't suspect anything. He simply did the same thing he did to the girls before, put a bandage on Shiryuki's finger. Akari was increasingly convinced that Shiryuki was truly strange. She wanted to tell Haruki immediately that Shiryuki was a dangerous man.